Welcome to Woodlawn Talks. It is my favorite day of the month. It's the day that we are recording the next podcast to be able to share some experience that we have had and to just hopefully be a blessing to those that are watching, to those that are listening today. And I am so excited to have Marvin Mitchell, the one and only, I called him this past weekend in our church. I called him a kingdom builder because that's who he is. That's what he's passionate about. And today we're just gonna be sharing some vision nuggets. That's what I would just call this today, because it's really doesn't have just a central theme, but it's about vision. We're at the beginning of the year. We're just trying to set the stage for what God has planned for this local church, for your local church, for your family, for your business. And I don't know about you, but this is my best day yet. It feels good to be back in studio today, and privileged to have my good friend Marvin Mitchell at Woodlawn Talks. And so welcome to the podcast, bro.
It's great to be here today.
It's an honor to have you. We have enjoyed having you at Woodlawn, and what a blessing you are to our church and to our family. And Marvin, I just want to talk about something today that you're very passionate about, and I am as well. But you're just kind of you're the authority on this issue, and that word is vision. Like, you work with a lot of churches, a lot of leadership teams. Yeah. You work with vision mapping, vision campaigns, helping leadership teams get ready for the new year. We're right here at the beginning of February, and so it's not too late to be thinking about and casting vision for our churches, for our businesses, obviously for our families and personal lives. But today I want to just dive a little bit deeper in the fact that as pastors, as individuals, many times we're good at casting vision.
Right.
But we're not as good as follow through as far as allowing people to catch that vision and putting that vision into action. And so I know you would not refer to you as an expert,
not at all.
But I know that you've really dove deep into this subject. So let's just talk about, how do we allow the people that we lead to catch the vision that we have already cast?
Well, that's a privilege. I'm very excited to talk about this subject today. Probably each and every week, sometimes multiple times a week, I have the privilege to sit down with leaders, business leaders, organizational leaders, church leaders, life leaders, to talk about how do we give life to vision? How do we facilitate the vision that God has given us? How do we take a business action plan and see it to fruition? How do we take a plan and actually see a result? And
that's what we're after.
That's what we're after.
I mean, a vision is no good without producing results.
Where are the fruits? And a lot of times we will see vision that is cast out, and then what happens to that? And we see people walking around our churches or our organizations or our businesses, perhaps our school hallways, and we see them asking the question, hey, we were very excited about that. We came together. We had a planning retreat. We mapped it out. We filled a room with great ideas.
Post-its on the wall.
Post-its all over the place, and we've got apps to drive and remind and inspire.
We may even have a name for that vision.
Most of the time, and a great acronym if we're going back to the 90s, because you have to have a good acronym whether or not it fits your vision or not. But we try to get all these creative elements to get this thing started. But we want to see vision fulfilled. I believe that's what God has called us to do.
Absolutely.
We are stewards with vision. So about, I'd say 10 years ago, maybe even 15 at this point, I went on a quest. It was a personal quest. It wasn't to endeavor to share this with anybody. It was just I wanted to figure out, God, what is your vision for my life and purpose for our church, the church I was pastoring at the time, and also to help lead young leaders in doing it better than we did, right? Standing on the shoulders of the generation before us, and we want the next generation to stand on our shoulders. And I started diving into principles both inside the Christian world, but then my business background and education stretched me outside of that. And I realized that we're very good, especially in the church world, at casting vision. We're great from pulpits. We're great in large settings. I think we have the best communicators in the world.
I agree
in
with
our
that.
organization.
Yeah.
But what do we do after that? And one of these concepts that just absolutely deconstructed a lot of my assumptions about vision was an article I read in Harvard Business Review. Now, social media gurus a lot, they'll talk about dripping, and there's a lot of different connotations to that, and it probably seems like it might have started on Instagram somewhere, but it was actually a big group of nerds in the business world up in Manchester, up in Harvard Square, and they were coming together and they did a series of case studies about what is the difference between an organization or a corporation or even a small business that casts great vision, and then they wanted to see who succeeded in that vision. And they developed this concept called vision dripping. And I remember hearing that term, and it sounded very strange to me. I never heard that term. But as I dove into it, I realized that this can help us right where we are. If you're a leader, first leading yourself and how you steward leading yourself, I think we are then trusted with influence to lead others. But how do we begin to give life to the vision that we have cast? Because if vision is cast in a large audience from a big platform, so to speak, what can happen in order to continue that momentum and sustain that excitement to see this through? And vision dripping, in the concept, it says we take this vision and the difference in the case studies that they presented in vision that was fulfilled, and then vision that was just spoken, and then vision that was caught, and then there was a bridge that was never built between being caught and being fulfilled. But that bridge was in small conversations, not in big ones. There's a concept that John Maxwell introduced, and many have breached this subject over the years, called walk slowly through the crowd. And in our connotation,
I've heard him say that. He preaches
that.
that.
It's a paradigm shifting statement. But in your endeavor to do the work of God as ministers, let's not walk past the work of God on our way to do a job.
That's good.
And I think that plays in as we're starting to bridge this gap between the business world and the church world. We see this concept of vision dripping, and where we see vision start to be fulfilled is in small conversations like this one. It's in coffee table, and it's on small text groups. It's at dining room tables. It's what happens after vision is cast, vision is caught. Then how do I continually fuel that vision so that it comes to fruition?
Yeah, I know a pastor's struggle, Marvin, is, you cast in January, you have these big plans.
Right.
March, maybe we're still, pushing that hard from the pulpit.
Right.
But it begins to wane.
Sure.
Like, I think that's everybody's struggle. That's the reason so many have to recast vision every single year, because the vision that they have for their organization or their church gets lost in translation.
Right. I think it's very important that we also share the burden of sustained life. Vision's like a baby. We're good with new births, right?
Yeah.
I think we're learning in the discipleship process that a newborn baby can't just live on its own. We see it in the natural. I think we're understanding it in the spiritual better. But then with vision, it's a very similar thing, in that this thing is trusted to us, right? We have this vision. It's given to us. We're inspired toward it. So it's very hard to share it, And in order for it to really live, we have to entrust it into the hands of others. But those others have to be equipped to say, when we put this in your hands, I'm not just going to be the billows blowing fire back into this, but I need you to feed this. I need you to pray over it. I need you to speak life to it. I read this many years ago, the term abracadabra, as little kids, right?
Yeah.
Do magic tricks and hocus pocus. And a lot of times we even give it, sometimes a negative connotation because we're bringing in, the magi, and maybe that's Eastern religion. And actually its original origin and root is Hebrew. It is the Aramaic equivalent of a Hebrew phrase that the Jews would share to say, I speak this to give life to it.
Come on now.
And when I speak into something, it's as if it was. That reminds me of the creation account. I love John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. When God began to create things and give life to things, how did he choose to do that?
He spoke into
He spoke into that. And we preach that and we teach that. And then when God puts something into our hands, sometimes we forget that methodology. I think we need to go back to the biblical origin of this, and say, hey, abracadabra, I'm going to speak life into this vision. And speaking life into the vision doesn't just happen from the pulpit, from the big stage in the big room. I think to go back to that Maxwell principle, I think it happens in small conversations. I think some of the biggest moments in the life of a vision happen in small settings.
So let's practically talk about what this looks like, and I want to do it from a church perspective,
Right.
And then I want to do it kind of like for somebody that's listening to this today, and you have a vision for your family for this year, like you really want this to be a pivotal moment, like in your children's lives,
Right.
in your home. I want to talk about that, but let's start with church.
Okay.
I'm a pastor. I cast vision in January. I just did this at Woodlawn. How do I give life to this vision throughout the year, or how do I promote for our church to give life to this vision so that when we get to the end of 2024,
Right.
That wasn't just something that was pretty in the pulpit,
Yes.
At the beginning of the year, but it has taken on life.
I think the beginning step of that goes to ownership. If a church feels like this is pastor's vision for pastor to carry and pastor to burden, that's a small church mentality. When I say small, it's all relative,
Yeah.
right? But ownership comes when you come before this church and say, this is a God idea, this is a God vision, and now this is in your care. And you take ownership over this. You protect it. You fuel it. You pray it through. You use your giftings that may not be my giftings to help it come to be. Because the body of Christ, Ephesians 4 says, we're fitly joined together, and every joint supplieth. I think everybody sees that they're part of the body when they are in the church, part of the bride. But do they see that the vision, the future, the life of the church actually happens outside the walls of the church? Because this building it's a beautiful building. You have a great campus. This is not the church. We are the church. And if there is vision given to the man of God, the shepherd of this flock, of this region, of this community of believers, that has to get outside the walls of the church, and it can't just be your job. The pastor only has so much of a voice. But think about if these people grabbed a hold of that vision and said, God has allowed me to be a steward with this vision, and I can give life to it, and I can start to have conversations. I can start to have different prayers of responsibility, of care, of giving life. God would use each of our giftings to come together. The greatest revival in the book of Acts, that we preach all the time. In Acts chapter 2 in the upper room, they came together in one mind and one accord.
Yes.
They were unified around something very central. There was a revelation giving. It was preached, but it didn't stop with Peter's voice. It then went to the people, and it spread house to house. That revival started because of home conversations.
Dripping. Yeah.
Everyday life. Not holding a microphone, but speaking life as God did in small settings that made big difference.
Wow. And so, Marvin, we know, like, it's pretty common these days. Like a family will have a word for the year,
Sure.
or an individual will
Right.
have a word.
Right.
How do we encourage those that are listening today to not just have that word, but to live that word and to let that seep, to your children?
Right.
And everybody, you wouldn't be listening to this podcast today if you didn't have, great hopes and
Right.
dreams that 2024, was going to be a year of growth for you, a year of
Yes.
progress.
Yes.
So let's talk practically. Like, what does that look like in a family setting? I mean, you got 2 kids,
Yeah.
amazing young people.
They are.
Like, how are you growing them? How are you
Yeah.
seeing progress in their life?
Carefully.
If you get it figured out, let me know.
I want to read that book. Somebody writes it, The Book of Parenting. We are so blessed to have 2 incredible teenagers in our home, one about to go to college and one about to go to high school. I think one of the things we have to do is not make this so complicated. We overcomplicate things.
You're exactly right.
We really do. God, in His Word, and as we're speaking His Word into our words, He gave us the power of the tongue. Proverbs 18. Life and death are in the power of the tongue. And I think instead of us, it's very difficult for me sometimes. So I talk all the time. I tease. I say, man, you better interrupt because we talk for a living. And my kids will laugh. But I think sometimes we need to talk less and let them talk more, because there's a lot more in this next generation that we give them credit for. And if we carry the same type of microphone into our homes, sometimes we'll speak that word and pray that word, and it's our responsibility to lead. And we join with our spouses in leading and guiding them. We need to listen to our kids. There are so many giftings and abilities. There are things they see. They've had experiences we haven't had, and they're dealing with a world we didn't grow up in. And I think they can speak sometimes that word better than we can, especially to their generation. So let's trust them. We've got to trust the next generation, because at some point, vision's going to start coming through them, and we're going to be receiving and catching that vision. And we're going to be fueling, funding,
We are funding.
protecting the vision that God gives them. And it's every parent's prayer, every pastor's prayer, every leader's prayer, that they will do things we couldn't even imagine. That's exciting.
Yes, it is.
And that's vision.
So Marvin, as we bring this to a close today, we wrap this up. As pastors, okay, we have cast that vision from the pulpit.
Yeah.
Most of us in January, some in February. That every church operates differently on that front. But how do we just keep this in front of, like, that it is central to their conversations?
Yes.
How do we make sure that a 15-year member
Right.
is thinking about the vision that I
Right.
cast in January
Right.
in June? Like, and not just thinking about it,
Right.
talking about it.
I think one of the things we need to do, baseball players always talked about clearing the mechanism. Our mechanisms are really cloudy. And I think we add so much to our lives that there's not room for the most important things. My advice, and what helps me and our family, is sometimes to sit down and have real accountability conversations about what can we remove from the equation so that the most important things are at the center and have prominence in our life. So I think, just me personally, it's usually I have too many things competing for that vision, for that word, for that thing that our family needs to focus on
That's
this
so
year.
good. Yes.
And we try to just shove more in, because the world tells us that more is going to equate to fulfillment. And that really, I don't see that in the Word of God. I don't see that in the most successful businesses. There was a book, Start With Why, that Simon Sinek wrote about 15 years ago. Great book. And in that in that book, there was something revelatory for me personally. And he began to deconstruct the notion that the most successful businesses, just added more complexity to their solutions. When you look at Martin Luther King, when you look at the Wright brothers, the first to fly, when you look at Apple being on the leading edge of technology,
Yeah.
why is it that they are so successful when their competitors are not? And the answer to the question is very simple. They never forgot why they started in the first place. They went back to the simple things. And I think if you cast vision in January, if you sit down with your family and say, this is going to be our focus this year, I think we need to clear the mechanism and get back to the why. Ask the question, why are we doing this? What is our purpose? Is our motion, is all the commotion, is the activity, are our calendars and the busyness of life should be accountable to that vision,
Yes.
and to the most important things. And if we draw back to answering the question of why, we will be accountable to fulfilling and succeeding in that vision. God help us to keep the first things first.
Yes. And we always say this, and this is so true if you're listening today, like whenever you get tired of speaking it,
Yeah.
Those that you're leading are probably just now starting to catch it.
Right.
Like you cannot be afraid
Right.
early and often
Early and often.
speak the vision.
It's going to feel redundant. It's going to
Yes.
feel repetitive, but anything that is really great is worth repeating.
I know, like even at Woodlawn, we get, chastised some, or people don't understand, why don't we do the offering declaration every Sunday,
Right.
or why don't we promote our discipleship program,
Yeah.
every single Sunday?
Right.
Because, hey, you may be tired of speaking it, but trust me, they're just now learning to grab a hold
Yes.
of the direction and vision.
And not just
Your
the
goal.
body of believers, but I think a lot of times in church, to that point, growing churches are not focused inwardly. They're not worried as much about what they're going to get out of that day. And it could be that moment you're just speaking to a small handful of guests. But let's be honest, in a growing church, other than Jesus Christ, the most important people in that room is not us.
It's the guest.
It's that guest.
Yeah.
And if they hear the gospel for the first time, if they hear the vision for this church for the first time, if they see how a ministry or a season or a series is going to impact their family, if they have that moment, that's a God moment, where they start to see themselves plugged into this family, this church family, into the body of Christ. And they have a moment when you've repeated something for the 52nd time in the last week of the year, and you're tired of saying it, but it may be the first time they have heard it, and that might be the moment they decide, this is my church.
So good, Marvin. Thank you for wisdom. You've just been dripping wisdom all day in the room. Thank you for being a part of Woodlawn Talks. I hope something today has resonated with you, and that you are literally determined that this year is going to be different. As my son says, it's just going to hit different.
Yeah.
It's gonna be different for you and your church, for you and your family, and ultimately affect your future and the next generation. Make this your best day yet.